Yeah, namaste all. Good evening. So last week, last Saturday, we started the discussion on Chhatrapati Shivaji. To begin with, we started with few of the points, few of the facts associated with Shivaji. And as I mentioned in the first session, the agenda of our discussion would be around how it was a Hindavi Swarajya, how was the administration of the Hindavi Swarajya, how were the battles planned and fought, the foundation of Navy, and the unique topic, which is Bill of Exchange, the way to tackle British. So the majority of portion or majority of the content which we saw in the previous session, it dealt with the Hindavi concept of Hindavi Swarajya, or how it was, the concept was a pan-India concept, and it was not limited to the region of Maharashtra. So few things we came across, like I listed. There are some claims which are there about Shivaji. So the one point I thought of revisiting today, in the sense, making few things clear. When we say that Shivaji was not secular, or Shivaji was a Hindu king, proud Hindu king, so it may be taken as, it may be interpreted in a different way by different people. So to add to this point is, if we consider the definition of secular from the liberal or left historians' point of view, considering that Shivaji was not secular, he was a proud Hindu king. His Hindavi Swarajya was for the protection of Hindu Dharma. But if we look at the concept of secularism from Hinduism point of view, or what are the true values of Hindu Dharma, we are safe to say that Shivaji was secular, in the sense or in the context that which I listed in the next slide, that Shivaji never had hatred against any of the religion. So he did not wage any war against any specific religion. The intention of his Hindavi Swarajya was the protection of Hindu Dharma, or protection of Hindu people. So I can say that when we say that Shivaji had no hatred for any other religion, it also reflects that he did not wage a war against out of any grudge for any of the religion, or it was not a persecution against people based on the religion, but the intent of Hindavi Swarajya was protection of Hindu Dharma. And if we see the personality of Shivaji Maharaj, it was a very magnetic personality, very charismatic personality. And as I mentioned, so there were many people, the people from all the communities, all the other caste, were part of his Hindavi Swarajya, and some of them were Muslims, and even some of them were Portuguese. So we are safe to say that though Shivaji, the foundation of Hindavi Swarajya was for protection of Hindu Dharma, the people who were from other folds of the religion, but they were impressed with the personality of Chhatrapati Shivaji, they supported him in the cause of Hindavi Swarajya. Moreover, that when I say that Shivaji was not a secular from liberals' definition of secularism, so it means that just for the sake of pleasing his commanders or his officers from other religions, he did not change any of his policy towards Hindu Dharma. And the important claim which I would to revisit once again here is, there were 30% Muslims in his army, so which is completely baseless. So there are no records for this. The important reason is, as I said, Shivaji never calculated the percentage of his soldiers based on any religion. So that concept of what is the percentage or what is the proportion of any of the religion or any of the caste has become important in today's politics, which was not the case during Shivaji's time. So with this, so these 2 points I wanted to, to make some of the things clear, so that those would not be taken or interpreted in a different way. Or it is what I feel is the Shivaji's image should not be taken as a fanatic Hindu from any of the from anyone who may come across this session or our ideas in future. So any doubts on this, or if anyone wants to add on this particular topic?
No, let's move ahead. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So we'll start with the part where we left off in last session. Yeah. This part we saw like desecration of demolition of mosque, which were built on the original Hindu temples, and rebuilding or restoring of the temples which were demolished in past. So today we'll start with administration of Hinduvi Swarajya. So I made a mention of Shivaji's coronation in previous session. So he coronated himself on Raigad, which comes in the western region of present-day Maharashtra. And this coronation was performed with Vedic rituals. The main challenge that arose at the time of Shivaji's coronation was, since there were no kingdoms or Indian kings or Hindu kings in the region of Maharashtra, or approximately 350 years prior to the time of Shivaji. So all the rituals which are involved in the process of coronation were vanished, or most of the scholars or priests who were there in the region were not aware of or were not completely clear about what Vedic rituals are to be performed for coronation. The challenge was solved. The issue was resolved with the help of one of the Pandit, Gaga Bhatt, who was living in Varanasi at that point of time, and who traveled to Maharashtra, to the region of Shivaji, and he convinced Shivaji to get coronated. So though Shivaji was a leader, or he was a non-coronated king till that point of time, so he convinced about the importance of getting coronated, and it gives a different importance when the king gets coronated. It has a different set of importance associated with that. So with that, the coronation was performed. And after coronation, so though the administration existed even before the coronation, the administration of the Hinduvi Swarajya, it existed right from the inception of Swarajya in 1646. There were some reforms made at the time of coronation. For example, the Ashtapradhan Mandal was appointed. So earlier, all the officers were already there, but the Ashtapradhan Mandal was deployed, or it was appointed at the time of administration, at the time of coronation, for smooth working of the Swarajya, the smooth administration. One more point to note here, one more difference this coronation made was the introduction of Rajya Vyavhar Kosh, which was introduced. The Rajya Vyavhar Kosh was a dictionary of the words consisting of the words required for the administration purpose. What was the necessity of this dictionary was because of the long Islamic rule in the surrounding region at that time. So most of the words, including administration, those involved in the administration, or even those which were involved in the day-to-day life of common people, were corrupted, and many of the Arabic or Persian words were being used by common people. And since this was a Hindu Swarajya, this was a kingdom of Hindus, it was necessary to give away the things which were forcefully induced by Islamic rule. And the words of day-to-day use are the simplest things that can be implemented. So that is why Shivaji appointed one of his scholar, one of his courtman. His name was Raghunath Panta Hanumante. He was instructed to find alternative, Sanskrit alternative for all the words which were in the day-to-day use. Wherever there were original words in the Prakrit or Marathi language of that time, those were replaced with those words, and wherever there was no replacement found for with the Prakrit words, for that the Sanskrit words were used, and this Rajya Vyavhar Kosh was introduced. And from coronation, all the things were for all the purposes. The words from this Rajya Vyavhar Kosh were instructed to be used. I would like to give a few examples. The word talwar, sword. The word used in Swarajya till that point was talwar, for sword. But if you see, talwar is not the Indian word. It's Arabic plus Persian word. So what was the word, replacement word for talwar? It was khadag. Khadag is a Sanskrit word for sword. So that was adopted. One more example I'd like to give. It is the word which is island. For the word island, the naming used in those duration, those time was Janjira. We have seen the fort of Janjira in our previous session, which was ruled by Siddhi. So the new replacement for island was Dweep. It was no more Janjira. It was to be used as Dweep. So I feel this Rajya Vyavhar Kosh as one of the trend setting or difference making decision taken by Shivaji at the time of coronation. Yeah, if I go further, so I have listed the positions which were included in Ashtapradhan Mandal. So as the name suggests, it is Ashtapradhan. So the council of 8 ministers. And the names are given, the positions in that Ashtapradhan Mandal I have listed. So first is Pantapradhan, which corresponds to Prime Minister. The word used prior to coronation for this position was Peshwa. So Peshwa is not an Indian word. Peshwa is Arabic word, which means the same. It means Prime Minister. But the word Shivaji started introducing in his administration was now Pantapradhan. The next post was Amatya, which is Finance Minister. The previous word position was Muzumdar. Similarly, Sachiv for Secretary, Senapati, Sumant. Sumant here is used for Foreign Minister. Nyayadhish, Pandit Rao, and Mantri. So Mantri here, though the word Mantri seems to be very general word for minister, the Mantri in Shivaji's Ashtapradhan Mandal was referring to Information Minister or Wakia Navis. So the one who takes care of Waka. Waka is again Arabic word which literally means as information. The one who takes care of Waka is Wakia Navis. So even this name was now changed to Mantri. So in this list, I have listed the names used by Shivaji, and bracket I have used the names, the English corresponding English and Arabic names which were used at that time. So it's a Hindavi Swarajya. So all the things, the definitely the stress was given on self-reliance, self-sustainability, and the purification of language is the first thing that any ruler can do in administration. The roles and responsibilities of all these ministers were clearly defined. These ministers and their reportees, those who were deployed to work under them. So for all of them, roles and responsibilities were clearly defined, except Pandit Rao and Nyadhish. All others were being sent on military campaigns. So Pandit Rao was a position which used to take care of donations, all the dharmic rituals in Swarajya. So the person appointed on this position was not required to take part in any of the military campaign or any of the war. Similarly, Nyadhish had a specific work to listen to all the disputes and listen to all the evidences and give the justice. So for these reasons, these two positions had altogether a different set of responsibilities to be performed. That is why these two were exempted from the duty of war. Yeah. So as I mentioned in many times, like even to, in the last session, as I mentioned, so the system of feudalism was discontinued. The confederacy system was no longer kept working. So, and this was done since the inception of Swarajya. This decision was not at the time of coronation. So from the beginning, this rule was there. And every contributor to the Swarajya was being paid with the salary. So there were annual or monthly salaries that were being paid. Even the concept of bonus or extraordinary pay was there in case of extraordinary contribution to the Swarajya. So we may think that this bonus concept is brought by Britishers, but that is not true. Yeah, this bonus at the time of Shivaji was not necessarily in terms of pay. It could be in terms of gift, or it could be in terms of special rewards. But that was only in case of extraordinary contribution. So one occasion I would like to mention here. So what was a kind of bonus? So one of the commander, Kondaji Farzand, was appointed, was sent on a campaign to conquer Panhala, fort of Panhala. And he conquered the fort with just 60 soldiers. So the 60 soldiers under Kondaji Farzand, they climbed the fort and they conquered the fort. And since this was achieved with just 60 soldiers, which was extraordinary achievement, in that case, all the soldiers who took part in that campaign were given with the golden kada and horse. So this is what comes in the records. The grants were given only to dharmic institutes. Grants were not given to any sardar or any soldier or any officer. The grants were given only to the dharmic institutes. So as confederacy system was discontinued, the main advantage was all the soldiers, right from a foot soldier to Pantapradhan, everyone was loyal to the king. There were no power centers in the Swarajya. Though there was a decentralization of responsibilities, but the ultimate king, the ultimate power center was a king or Chhatrapati. So if we see what happened in future, probably after 30-40 years of after Shivaji's death, because of the uh, few of the reasons. One of that was Chhatrapati or the kings were not as strong as Shivaji in 18th century. Towards the beginning of 18th century, this decentralization took place, which was done by few of the Peshwas in the early 18th century. And because of this, the confederacy system was once again installed. The result of that was, over the period of years, over the period of few decades, Chhatrapati or the king became of less importance. The power got centralized in the hands of Peshwa or Pantapradhan. And again, if we go if we see few more decades after that, the power got decentralized among all the confederators. It may be Holkar, it may be Shinde, it may be Pawar. But no, the soldiers or the generals or the commanders, their loyalty to king started declining, which was not the case at the time of Shivaji. Go next. Yeah, so we often come across, if there is any of the kingdom or any of the state or any of the government, so whatever policies it runs, whatever policies are run, or whatever grants are given, or whatever expansions are done, so all that is possible if there is sufficient amount of revenue with the government. And Hindavi Swarajya was not an exception for this. It required a revenue to run the government, to pay the salaries of all the soldiers, all the officers. So the principal portion of this revenue was tax collected from the people. So if we see in today's time, the tax is only for merchants and those who are into the employment, but there is no tax on the agricultural products or agricultural income. But if we see in times of Shivaji or anywhere in our history, the tax was applicable on agricultural income as well. This tax in Hindavi Swarajya was collected in terms of either cash or goods. So it was not mandatory to pay the tax by cash. Even goods were accepted. Many factories and trading centers were owned by the administrating bodies of Hindavi Swarajya. The factories are the factories which are, the example is factories which are involved in making of weapons, which were sword or spears or arrows at that point of time. And the factories involved in the manufacturing of cannons. So Shivaji had started manufacturing of cannons at few of the places. One example I would like to give in terms of why this tax was accepted in terms of goods. The reason is, as I said, the tax was applicable even on the agricultural income, and this tax was applicable on initially, in initial days, the tax was applicable on the area of the land which belongs to a specific farmer. But over the period of time, there were some reforms in that, and the income actual the agricultural products which are harvested, based on that income was considered for calculation of the tax. It so happened in the coming years, it was observed that if we see the season of harvesting, so most of the time the products, agricultural products, are harvested approximately around the same time frame. And there are a lot of agricultural products in the market, And we hear the news sometimes, even today, that let's say in some area, the onions were harvested in large amount. And because of that, prices got dropped. And there was some chaos because of that. So this concept of demand and supply and the pricing of goods based on that even existed during Shivaji's time. So since all the harvested agricultural products used to come to the market around the same time, the prices used to drop. And because of that, the returns or the amount that farmers used to get was less. But if we look at the tax that has to be paid to the government, that was independent of the price. That was dependent on the price which is set by the government. So let's say if as per the government records, the income, agricultural income of one XY ABC person is 100 rupees. So as per the tax, percentage of tax on the income during Shivaji's time, which was 40%, the tax the ABC farmer has to pay was 40 rupees. But if he goes to the market to sell his goods, because of the price drop, he used to get around 70 or 80 rupees. But 40 rupees he had to pay at any cost to the government. So the farmer was left with merely 30 or 40 rupees. And this was creating a problem for the farmers, financial issues for the farmers. So on the request, this tax collection was revisited. There were reforms made. And the administration, Swarajya administration, they started collecting tax in terms of goods. So instead of paying 40% or 40 rupees as a tax, the farmers started depositing a 40% of their agricultural product to the government. There were two benefits. One was government started getting some of the goods for its trading centers. The advantage for farmers was the financial loss they were occurring because of the fall in the prices. It was not completely eliminated, but it was eliminated up to some extent. The second point in this was the trading centers, which were owned by the government of this Hindu Swarajya. So when they had a sufficient amount of goods with them, grains or any other agricultural products with them, they started selling it to the merchants based on availability in the market. This in turn generated revenue for Swarajya, and the problems, financial losses for farmers also started reducing. Not completely eliminated, but they started reducing. Yeah. Next. Yeah, this is before going to next slide. So I briefly mentioned what was the percentage of tax in the Swarajya. So we'll be surprised to know that it was 40%. If we look at the tax today, it is in the slabs of 5%, 20%, and 30%, with some cess on it, for 4% cess. And there is no tax on agricultural products. But if you look at that time, it was flat 40% tax on all kind of income. Still, the common people or farmers were happy with that 40% tax. There are no records of the farmers cheating on paying the tax or rejecting or refusing to pay the tax. What could be the reason? Even though this 40% looks high amount. Any guess from anyone on the call? Why they were happy with 40, even with 40% tax?
Maybe they were protected from invaders, is it?
Yeah, that was one of the primary reason. Any other guess?
credibility was high. The
Yeah.
leadership was very credible. But
Correct.
I have a sub question on this. Was it 40% or 25%? Because I read
It was,
somewhere it's Chauth. It is called Chauth, no?
yeah,
One
there were,
fourth.
yeah, that is 1/4. That comes about to 25%. But there were two taxes in that time. One was Chauth, and the second tax was Sardeshmukhi. So total tax was 40%.
I think the tax before Shivaji, when the Mughals were ruling, was perhaps even much higher.
Yeah, that is the primary reason actually. So the tax during prior Islamic rules was approximately 60%. And there was not only a tax, there were 50 types of cess on tax. With that, with all the taxes and 50 types of cess, the total tax used to go to the number of 60%. And Shivaji removed all other cess. Only tax was kept, this 40% tax. There may be few more reforms after Shivaji's time or during the time when Peshwa were powerful. And one more point to note here is, out of this tax paid to the government, 2/5 of that was used to stay with the government, and 3/5 or 60% of total tax was being spent on the local, the development of in the local areas. For example, if a village pays 1,000 rupees as a tax, for example, the 400 of that used to go to the treasurer of Swarajya, and 600 was given to the local. Let's say we have Gram Panchayat in today's days. So there was a similar concept in those days. And the 60% of the total tax collected was being given to the local bodies, and it was used for the self-reliant or self-fulfillment of the villages. So yeah, there was a protection from invaders, there was a security, there was a credibility, and the tax was less than the prior ruler, prior time. So people were happy with that. Yeah, so there were no waivers on repayment of debts. So repayment of loan was mandatory. Waivers were given on tax only in case of natural calamities like flood or drought. Even in such cases, only in such cases, the waiver on tax was given. We might wonder, or we might feel that if the tax was based on the income, how much the products are harvested. So there may not be a question of if there is a flood or a natural calamity and there are all the farms are destroyed. So where is the question of waiver on the tax? Though the tax was based on the total income coming out of the agricultural products, there was some minimum amount of the tax that had to be paid. So there was a waiver on those taxes in case of natural calamities. There were budgets allocated for maintenance of all the forts. And the last point on this slide is very important. The regular transfers of higher officers and the fort keepers were done. Yeah, so this structure of army I have included as a part of administration. So there were 3 primary sections of Shivaji's army: infantry, or foot soldiers, cavalry or horse, the soldiers with horses, and navy. So I have included a separate section on the navy in the further slides. And I have mentioned few of the points on details on the rest of the army, like infantry and cavalry. So infantry was the main portion of Shivaji's army in the initial years. So on the reference I have given, so one number that during the battle of Pratapgarh, which was fought against Afzal Khan, the infantry of Swarajya or the foot soldiers were estimated to be between 10,000 to 12,000. This is in 1659 in the year. And around the same time, the cavalry was estimated to be approximately 3,000. The primary role of cavalry was expansion of Swarajya regions and the campaigns of long distance. This is very important when there are the campaigns of long distance. So it is very important to maintain for any of the army to maintain the pace of its pace of transportation. If you see the case of other Islamic empires or kingdoms in that time, or even if we see what happened in future during Peshwai time, as the size started of the army started swelling or started increasing, and there were some malpractices being introduced in the cases of campaigns. We have seen this case in case of Panipat, the background of Panipat battle, that there was a large portion of non-combatants in the entire army which was moving, and at times it proved to be problematic for the movement of the army from logistics point of view. So this was clearly stopped or from the inception of Swarajya. The rule was only combatants should be going on campaigns. So no merchants, no dancers were allowed. It was strictly combatants only. So the cavalry, since it has the advantage of fast movement, it was given a charge, or it was given a task of expansion of the regions and campaigns for the long distance. The example is Surat, the attack on Surat. Surat is it is too far from, if you see the Hindavi Swarajya region of that time. The Surat is in Gujarat, and the region of Hindavi Swarajya was in and around surrounding the region of Pune and western coast. So there was no other option than taking cavalry in that campaign. The primary role of infantry was defending the existing forts or regions and campaigns in remote areas or hilly areas. So the reason is it is very difficult to take the soldiers or the cavalry or the horses in the remote areas, which are maybe in the valleys. So it was the army was completely relied on infantry in such regions. By the time of we saw in 1659, the total strength was something around 13 to 14,000, including cavalry and infantry. At the time of Shivaji's coronation, the total strength of the army was estimated to be approximately 1 lakh, including infantry and cavalry. In cavalry, there were two types of soldiers. One was Shiledars and other one was Bargirs. Shiledars were the soldiers who were having their own weapons and horses. The Bargirs used to get all the weapons and horses from government. So we can say that in today's terminology, Shiledars were similar to full-time employees and Bargirs are similar to contract or part-time employees. It's a rough comparison. Shiledars throughout the year, they used to be on the duty of Swarajya. On the other hand, if you see Bargirs, most of them used to be farmers who used to join the military campaigns once the harvesting season gets over. If you see in ancient times, the military campaigns used to start after Vijayadashmi. Vijayadashmi was considered as an auspicious muhurta for starting new campaigns. So for 3 to 4 months, this Bargirs used to work in their day-to-day work, maybe farming or any other profession. But during the time of campaigns, they used to join the Swarajya. Obviously, the salaries for Shiledars were much higher than those of Bargirs because Shiledars had to maintain their own weapons, their own horses. The unique feature of Hinduist Swarajya was the army consisted of soldiers from all sections of the society. And the promotions or the new responsibilities were given purely based on the bravery and performance, or in today's language or in today's terminology, it's based on the performance. But it was bravery and contribution in the wars, in the campaigns that was being considered in those times. That is why we see different commanders from different sections of the society. Prior to that, if we observe, it was a general trend that only Kshatriyas were allowed to fight or take part in the military campaigns. But Shivaji opened it for all. Whoever is capable, whoever is brave, was welcome in the army. That's why we see the commanders like Bajiprabhu Deshpande or Puropanta Pingale or Murarbaji Deshpande being born as a Brahmin, they were leading the troops in Shivaji's army. Yeah, so we saw that the army was growing. It reached the number of huge number of 1 lakh by the time of Shivaji's coronation. So it was very important to maintain a discipline in the growing army. So there was a discipline in place. There were do's and don'ts for the army. There were punishments defined for different kinds of crimes. The punishment for irresponsibility in the service was termination from the service. Irresponsibility in the service, the example may be not finishing the task, not collecting the tax on time, or paying or collecting a less money by taking a bribe. So for corruption, there was a different set of punishment. It was termination of service and seizing of estates. So these punishments were not given blindly, or if there is one claim on that someone has committed a crime, it was not that punishment was given blindly. The trials were being run, and if the charges were proved, only then these punishments were implemented. Because if we see irresponsibility in the service and corruption in the service, so corruption is more severe or more critical crime. That is why even severity of punishment was more. The punishment for treachery was the highest punishment. It was death penalty once charges were proved. So if any one of us has visited Raigad Fort, they might have seen a place on the Raigad called Takmaktok, which was used as a place for punishment, and whoever is found guilty with treachery or working against Swarajya or working for the enemy, they were given death penalty by throwing off the cliff. There is a perception that for all kinds of crime, the penalty was throwing from Takmaktok, but that is not the case. The punishments were, this level of punishment were defined, were decided based on the level of the crime. The punishment for misbehavior with women or their molestation was chopping off the limbs. Of course, after the trial and once the charges were proved. There was one incident in the initial years of Hindu Swarajya where chief of one of the village, Babaji Guzar, he molested a lady from his village. He was imprisoned immediately. He was tried in the court. And once his crime was proved, both of his hands and legs were cut off. One more example of the punishments. During Afzal Khan campaign, the battle against Afzal Khan, one of the officer of Shivaji, his name was Khandoji Khobde. He thought that Afzal Khan, since Afzal Khan is coming up with large army, nothing can happen with nothing good can happen with Shivaji now, and either Shivaji will get imprisoned or he will be killed. So he left Swarajya and joined Afzal Khan. And once everything was normal, we all know, and even we will see in the coming slide, that Shivaji killed Afzal Khan near Pratapgarh. After that, it followed a different set of campaigns. And after 1 or 2 years after that, when everything was settled, this Khandoji Khobde, once again, he entered Swarajya and he begged for the mercy, saying that whatever he had done in past, he will not do it again. And the worst part is he did it through one of the commander or one of the officer, Kanoji Jede, who was very loyal to Shivaji. This Khandoji Khobde was one of the relative of this Kanoji Jede, and he tried to use his influence in for Shivaji. But Shivaji said, because of the influence, he said he is ready to give, to spare his life, Khandoji's life, but as a one sign of punishment that no one should do it in future. So his one hand and one leg were cut. There's one more incident from 1678. Shivaji was returning from his campaign of South India, and during their return, the Swarajya's army or Shivaji's army had camped near Belaudi, which is near Dharwad. And one of his officer, Dadaji Nedkar, he tried to molest one of the lady in that region, whose name was Mallamma. She was a widow of local chieftain in that village, that place. And this lady made a complaint to Shivaji about the deeds of Dadaji Nidkar. He was brought in front of Shivaji, and when he accepted his crime, and when it was proved, his eyes were gouged out. He was blinded. There's one more incident, how much respect Shivaji had for women, irrespective of their religion, given here. In 1657, when Swarajya was in expansion mode, in expansion phase, the regions of Kalyan and Bhivandi were conquered. I made a mention of this Kalyan and Bhivandi, the same place where the mosques were demolished on Shivaji's order, because those mosques were built on after destroying the temples. In the same region, so Adil Shahi, so this region was conquered by Shivaji in 1657. And Adil Shahi general, who was appointed in that region, he fled after this attack. And while fleeing from this, his daughter-in-law was arrested by the Shivaji soldiers, and she was presented in front of Shivaji. Shivaji, however, apologized to that lady for misbehavior of his troops, and she was sent back to her family with all the respect. The records say that when that lady was presented in front of Shivaji, the things which the soldiers had in their mind was probably the effect of what persecutions were put on Hindu ladies during Islamic invasions. It was a common practice by Islamic soldiers to molest or to rape a Hindu lady in the region. Probably Shivaji's soldiers who had captured her had a similar idea, but the values of Shivaji were altogether different. He said to that lady that if I had been your son, I would have been more beautiful. So he treated that lady as his mother. He gave her respect as he used to give to his own mother. So this is to add to the point which I discussed in the beginning of the session, that there was no hatred for any of the religion. Yeah, he demolished, Shivaji ordered to demolish the mosques which were built on destructed temples, because those were forcefully built. The mosques were forcefully built. He reconverted few of his relatives and generals back to Hindu religion because they were forcefully converted. And his kingdom he referred as Hindavi Swarajya, because it was the Swarajya of Hindus. It was a kingdom for protection of Hindu Dharma. But being said that, yeah, it's in our Hindu values, the values, core values of Hindu Dharma, that we respect or we do not hate other religions. And Shivaji was not an exception for that. That is why I mentioned in the beginning of session that the Shivaji's action should not be interpreted as a fanatic Hindu. He was a secular, or I would say he was a proud Hindu. He was secular if we are considering the definition of secularism from Hindu point of view. But definitely he was not a secular if we are considering the definition of the so-called left and liberals. There is one more incident that I would like to add here. When Shivaji was on his campaign to South India, there was a fort which Shivaji conquered, which Shivaji captured in Tamil Nadu. Its name is Jinji. It is, even today it is there, that fort is there in Tamil Nadu. And when he attacked the Jinji fort, the officer of the Islamic, the Muslim officer on that fort was Nasir Muhammad. I will take a short time to explain what is the link between Shivaji and or Shivaji's campaign and this Nasir Muhammad. We know Adil Shahi, which had a headquarter in Vijapur. It was an Islamic kingdom. Over the period of time, mainly because of Shivaji's campaigns, the Adil Shahi became weak. The emperor, Adil Shah emperor, became weak. And there were two groups in the court of Adil Shahi. One group was led by Turki Muslims, which was, and the leader of this Turkic group was Bahlol Khan. And the other group was of Dakhani Muslims, most of whom were converted Muslims. Their leader was Khawaz Khan. This Khawaz Khan was murdered somewhere around a few years prior to Shivaji's coronation. This Khawaz Khan was murdered, who was a wazir at that point. And by murdering Khawaz Khan, this Bahlol Khan became wazir of Adil Shahi. And the cousin or the brother of this Khawaz Khan, who belonged to the group of Dakhani Muslims, was Nasir Muhammad, who was chief commander at Jinji Fort. And when Shivaji came to attack this Jinji Fort, so before starting any battle or any siege, any direct attacks, he sent a letter to Nasir Muhammad in which he mentioned about his links or his prior communications with Khawaz Khan. And he offered, this Nasir Muhammad was offered to surrender the fort. Some money, some amount of money was agreed to be paid. And after thinking, Nasir Muhammad agreed to surrender the fort. He surrendered the fort, took the money, and left the region with his left the fort with his family. And Shivaji lived to his words. Nasir Muhammad was not harmed at all, as he had signed the agreement and he agreed to vacate the fort. He was not harmed. After this Jinji, Shivaji turned his army to the fort of Vellore. Vellore, we all know, even today that place is there. Vellore is there in Tamil Nadu. Shivaji was camping at Vellore, but he was not able to capture the fort easily. He had to put a lot of effort. Even the commander at this Vellore fort, he was not ready for surrender. And there were two surrounding hills near the fort of Vellore. So Shivaji started construction of forts on those hills so that he can take his cannons, take his artillery to that newly constructed forts and attack on this Vellore fort. So by doing this arrangement, Shivaji returned back to Swarajya because he was already on this South India campaign for more than 1.5 years. It was close to 2 years. Shivaji was away from Swarajya. So instead of staying at Vellore, Shivaji returned back to Hindavi Swarajya with all the soldiers and with few of the generals appointed on the duty to capture Vellore. But still, this Vellore fort was not able, the army, Shivaji's army was not able to capture. So one day, this Nasir Muhammad, who had vacated, who had surrendered the Jinji, he secretly went inside Vellore fort. He talked to the commander or the fort keeper, and he convinced that the fort keeper of Vellore, saying that Shivaji is very good man, accept whatever he is giving, presenting as the compensation, and he will not harm. And the same thing was followed, and the fort keeper of Vellore, he surrendered the fort and left the place. Again, he was not harmed. So the essence is, he respected Shivaji, respected even few of the members from few of the commanders from the enemy with whom he had a link of communication through other channels. And in this case, this Nasir Muhammad, not only he surrendered the fort, he started a publicity for Shivaji in that region. So we'll go to next part. Yeah, it was in January 1664. So the points or incidents which I have mentioned here are not completely chronological. They are put in a way the discussion, the topic is progressing. It was in January 1664 that Shivaji with his army attacked Surat. The intention of this attack was raid the financial centers of Mughals to recover the losses suffered by prior Mughal campaigns in the regions of Swarajya. Which was that campaign? The main campaign, Mughal campaign in the region of Swarajya prior to this was the campaign of Shaista Khan. Shaista Khan was there in the region of Swarajya. He had occupied the region of Pune, and he was camping there for more than 3 years without making any other movement. He was idle. He did not do any campaigns, major campaigns, but he did impose a few persecutions on the surrounding region, on the citizens. Their houses were burned, the farms were burned. So to recover that loss, Shivaji took his cavalry and attacked Surat. So when he entered Surat, he sent a message to the Inayat Khan, who was an officer, Mughal officer at Surat, that give us a specified amount and will not harm your city, we'll go back. But Inayat Khan refused that. And finally, Shivaji ordered to attack the financial centers in the city. These raids continued for 5 days. During this, the army was instructed not to harm religious places, women, and children. Whichever merchant gives the said ransom or the said amount, they were instructed not to harm such merchants, but whoever were not ready to pay, in those cases, the soldiers were given a free hand to raid their places and recover the money. During this campaign, a group of Maratha soldiers was deployed to protect a house of merchant named Mohandas Parekh, who had passed away a few weeks ago. So it was not a blind campaign. Shivaji had gathered all the required information as to from which merchant he would get what and from where he can recover the amount. And there was one such merchant, Mohandas Parekh, who had passed away, who had demised few weeks or few months ago. And when it's a chaos everywhere, raids have going on, it is highly possible that a group of soldiers may end up attacking the place which is not supposed to be attacked. Even there is a high chance that someone else would disguise as being a soldier of Shivaji and attack this house to take the advantage of the situation. So to avoid all these reasons, Shivaji had sent a group of soldiers to protect this house. So any doubts till now from the members?
No, we will have the Q&A at the end.
Okay,
Please continue.
sure. Yes. So next important part I have included in my session is Shivaji's intelligence network or intelligence network of Hindavi Swarajya. This is something which lies between administration and the army, the actual army. Because intelligence is not something which is completely related to the military campaigns. A king has to keep a check on what things are happening within the country or within the administration as well. So that is why if we see in today's scenario, if we take example of India, there are two agencies, intelligence agencies. One is IB and other one is RAW. So IB takes care of the internal matters and RAW looks at the information from outside world. Yeah. So similarly, so there were the spies of Shivaji or the spies of Hindavi Swarajya who were regularly keeping a track, keeping a check of all the things happening in Swarajya as well as outside. And they were providing required information to Shivaji. So last session I mentioned about this foreign biographies of Shivaji, where there are records of Abbe Carré, who was a French traveler, who mentions in his record that although Shivaji, so in French record, the name Shivaji comes as Sevagy. In some of the British records, the name comes as Sevagy, but this refer to one person, Shivaji. So although Shivaji counted much upon his bravery and upon what he could do by open force, nevertheless, being a clever person, he had his own men and spies in every court, on whom he fixed a big sum for informing him for everything that happened. Can say that his intelligence network was strong, and he has implanted his agents or his spies everywhere, and he used to spend a good amount of money in exchange of information. Bahirji Naik was the chief of intelligence network. The working style of this network was so classified or so secret that only Bahirji's name appears in the records. So it is surprising. Yeah, even if we see in today's time, the names of all the officers in intelligence department are kept confidential. Their names are not disclosed, because if the name is leaked, there is a high chance that their life may be in danger, or the intent for which the agents are planted, that may not work. So the working style, even if you see in the records, there is no mention of how this network used to operate, where the spies were planted, what were their names, how they used to operate. Nothing comes in the record. what comes in the record is only that Bahirji Naik is the head of this network, and whatever is the required information is collected by these informers or spies, and all the things are planned based on this information. So this network proved to be crucial in Shivaji's success with limited resources. So limited resources, when I refer to it, it means in comparison, the limited resources in comparison with the Islamic kingdoms or Islamic emperors at that point of time. It may be Mughals, it may be Adil Shahi. Yeah, some of the highlighting achievements of this network. Campaign against Afzal Khan, raid on Shaista Khan, Surat campaign. This raid on Shaista Khan will come in a bit detail in our coming slides. This Surat campaign was, as I said, there was each and every required information was available with Shivaji when he attacked Surat. It was not a blind campaign. Then escape from Agra. This I consider myself as the most dramatic phase or most dramatic incident of Shivaji's life. Yeah, all other battles, all the things are equally important. But I personally feel this episode of Shivaji's life as the most dramatic, because though there was no direct battle or fight was involved in this episode of Agra, but what existed was a battle of wits. It was a battle of minds. It was a battle of brain between Shivaji and Aurangzeb. Both were trying to understand what is the next step of the other person, in which dramatically Shivaji succeeded. He managed to escape from the house arrest. And this was possible only because of the information collected by the spies or informers. Next, I have listed here is the capturing of crucial forts, which is Kondhana and Panhala. Examples I have given. So Kondhana was captured with 300 soldiers and Panhala was captured with 60 soldiers, which is unimaginable if you see, because the Kondhana is not a simple fort, or it's not even a fort on the ground. It's a mountain fort. It's a fort on the top of the mountain. And some of us might have seen this Tanaji movie. We were discussing before the start of the session how this was possible. Who gave the information on at which part of the fort there are no soldiers, there is no patrolling? Who gave the information on how many soldiers are there inside the fort? Who kept the gates open for Suryaji Malusare, Tanaji's brother, who attacked from the other main gate of the fort, and Tanaji climbed ascended the cliff and attacked? Who kept the doors open for Suryajita Malusare? So the simple guess is there were informers of Shivaji present on Kondhana, but their names are not known. Their names are not there in the records. And Panhala, I would say it's a peak of all the forts which are won, which are all, I would say this as a peak of all the campaigns. So capturing a fort which is even bigger and more dangerous, more difficult to capture than Kondhana, was captured by 60 soldiers led by Kondaji Farzand. And of course, South India campaign, because this was a region which was altogether new for Shivaji when he was campaigning. This South India campaign was around 1677 to 1678, approximately 2 to 3 years after his coronation, Shivaji's coronation. So the region was completely new. And it was very important, very crucial to have exact information available. And that is where the part of intelligence network was crucial here. One example I have given. So what level of information was available with Shivaji through informers? So he wrote one letter to Venkoji. Venkoji was Shivaji's half brother who coronated himself in Tanjavur. So it's what I have read was in Marathi. I have translated it. It's a translation of what reference comes in the book Raja Shivachatrapati. It says that you might have already received a letter from Bahlol Khan. Bahlol Khan, as I mentioned, as I made mention of a few slides back, that he was Wazir of Adil Shahi. To help, the letter was to help Sher Khan to capture Jinji. The fort keeper at Jinji was Nasir Muhammad, who was a rival of this Bahlol Khan. And Bahlol Khan had sent Sher Khan to capture Jinji. So Shivaji is saying, what Shivaji is saying? First, give your support to Sher Khan to capture Jinji. So give your support, get the hold of Jinji, and later, looking at a right opportunity, eliminate Sher Khan and add Jinji to your region, your territory. Unfortunately, Venkoji failed to achieve this. He did, basically he did not take any action on this. To be clear, he did not take any action. Later, when Shivaji was on campaign of South India, Shivaji captured this Jinji fort. I mentioned it some time back. He sent, he had a discussion, round of discussions with Nasir Muhammad, and in the exchange of money, Nasir Muhammad surrendered the fort. So see, this letter was sent by Bahlol Khan to Venkoji. And who has the information of this? What is written in that letter? First of all, Shivaji has the information that there is such letter sent by Bahlol Khan to Venkoji. And moreover that, he has information that what is written in that letter. So you can imagine what level of information, what level of informers were there with Shivaji. Yeah, so I have added a map of Hindavi Swarajya at the time of Shivaji's death. This was the region of Swarajya. So this is the region around Pune and western coast. And it includes regions from present-day Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Yeah. So I included the next part as the battles. So it comes in at various occasions in different records that Aurangzeb often addressed Shivaji as mountain rat, Pahad ka Chuha. It was a term Aurangzeb used to address Shivaji as. The primary reason for this could be, so this prior to direct clashes between Swarajya and Mughals, the major region of Swarajya was confined to the Sahyadri mountain ranges and western coast. And many historians claim that Shivaji fought only in the region of Sahyadri, of course through guerrilla warfare. The term used by Shivaji for guerrilla warfare is Ganimika. It's a surprise, a way of surprise attacks. Even technically we can say it's an ambush. But again, it's a utilization of available resources. Because if you see any of the battle which Shivaji fought, nowhere it was a battle of, nowhere the resources were of equal level. Always the resources his enemy had were more, but Shivaji had a bigger resource, which was Sahyadri. So historian Ninad Bedekar mentions in his speeches that Shivaji had, Mughals had big commanders, big generals. Even Shivaji had, but Shivaji had one general who was making altogether difference. It was General Sahyadri. Sahyadri is a name used for Western Ghat from the ancient time. Yeah. So, as I specified earlier, Shivaji strategically utilized the mountains of Sahyadri throughout his life. Of course, in the beginning of Hindavi Swarajya, Sahyadri was the only resource available with him. The army was less, the infantry was small, cavalry was almost not there. But over the period of time, as the things changed and more people started joining the cause of Hindavi Swarajya, and we saw that at the time of coronation, the army even reached the number of 1 lakh. However, there were battles fought and won in open fields. The Battle of Belsar, it is the first battle which Shivaji fought against Adil Shahi. It was in 1649. Surprisingly, most of us don't pay attention to it, but it was a battle in the open field. It was fought near the region of Purandar, which is near to present-day Pune. The Battle of Kolhapur, after assassination of Afzal Khan, when Shivaji captured further regions of Adil Shahi, there was a fresh army deployed by Adil Shah against Shivaji, and that battle took place near Kolhapur, and Shivaji won that. Battle of Dindori, it was in 1670. The unique thing about this Battle of Dindori is, to give the background of this battle, Shivaji was on his second campaign to Surat during the Diwali time of 1670. He was in Surat, and he took, similar to prior campaign, he collected a huge amount as a ransom from the merchants and through different raids. And on his way back to Hindavi Swarajya region, he was attacked from, his army was being chased by Daud Khan Qureshi, who was a Mughal general. And when it was evident that they would chase the Maratha army from back and they would attack, so Marathas decided, Shivaji decided to fight the battle, because he had a clear idea by that time that how much is the strength and how much is the speed of Mughals. So this battle was fought in open, it was the open battle, open field battle, and it was won by Marathas. It was won by Shivaji. Surprise attack was the key in Shivaji's warfare. So giving no time for the enemy to think of any further actions, there was attack. Shivaji had personally led some of the battles. I have listed some of them. The Battle of Pratapgarh, Surat campaign, conquest of Zawadi, raid on Shaista Khan, Battle of Umbarkhind and Battle of Dindori. These are some of the famous battles in which Shivaji had led himself. The army was led by Shivaji himself.
So time check, Hopkar, it's already 7:35.
Sure, yes. So have few slides. So should we cover them now, or
Yeah, if it is,
what I have?
how long will it take?
It may take 10 to 15 minutes, but I'm fine if we cover that next time.
No, because do we want to make it a part 3 or is it okay to end in next 2, 3? My suggestion is, can we end it a bit of a this thing, this session, and part 3 will decide later.
Sure, sure. So we'll finish this, and actually the part, the bill of exchange, which I have listed, so that is still not there. I think it might go in part 3.
Okay. Then do you want to end it now? Or we can end it. That's fine.
Yeah, we can end it, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so remaining part is I have included 2 of the Shivaji's battles, which is Battle of Pratapgarh, like assassination of Afzal Khan, and raid of Shaista Khan as representative battles here. We are not
Okay,
going
so
to
let's
cover all
make
the
it
battles.
part of part 3. Yeah? We don't have to hurry up on this.
Sure, yes.
Okay. Fine. So the session is now open for questions or comments, please. I request attendees to come forward.
Yeah.
Beginning, we were talking of Tanaji. I think I was mistaken in the sense Tanaji was very well made. The Bajirao Mastani was a movie where it was,
Yes.
they goofed it up. Whereas
True.
Tanaji was well made. So,
Correct.
right.
I had just one question.
Yes.
This is again based on the movies I've seen. Okay, so on the religious front, right? Are there any highlights of Shivaji? Because there are some things that he had a very good this one with Sant Tukaram, and even I think even with Mantralayam also. So I just want to check if that was true, if you will be covering it later, anything like that.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, this is not included. The association with religious places is not included as of now in this session. But the association with Hindu Dharma as such, we have covered in previous session, like how the Hindavi Swarajya was for protection of Hindus. That from that angle we have covered. But association with Santa Tukaram or which one? The second
Mantralaya.
one,
Mantralaya.
Mantralaya. Yeah, that is not part of the
No, I
discussion.
agree. It is not part of this. I just wanted to find out if that is even true. That's the only thing.
Okay. Yeah, I can make a note of it.
Okay.
Mantralaya,
Thank
in
you.
the sense, the one
Raghavendra
which is
Swami.
associated with Swami Raghavendra Swami.
Yes.
Let me check. Like the
Okay.
association with Santa Tukaram and Samarth Ramdas is historically proven. There
Okay.
are records for that. But this one I will make a note of it and
Okay.
try to
Thank you.
find.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one mention of Shivaji's visit to Sri Shailyam comes is it is mentioned during his South India campaign. Shivaji had visited the court of Qutub Shah in Golconda, and there were agreement signed between Qutub Shah and Shivaji, where Qutub Shah agreed to pay annual ransom, annual tributary to Shivaji in exchange of protection of his region from Shivaji. So this was signed, and after that, on his way to the region of Tamil Nadu, there are mentions of Shivaji visiting Sri Shailyam. Even at instance, Shivaji has mentioned that he even got a thought of giving up all the things and take sannyasa in Sri Shailyam. But immediately he came back to his goal and he gave up that thought. It was for instance that thought came to his mind by looking at the region, by getting impressed with the region. but he had a big goal in front of him. Any other questions or inputs?
Okay. If there are no other comments or questions, then we can end the session here.
Any comments from sir, Bhatt sir? Or Hari, any comments from you?
No, no comments now.
No.
No comments. Right.
A lot of new insights were covered. In fact, Nikhil was sharing with me that many of these things we didn't know was what Nikhil Rao was telling. Nikhil, you want to say?
Yeah, I would say that again, that a lot of new information is coming, at least. Definitely very informative talk. So thank you for this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will end the session with a Shanti Mantra. So I will request Nagi to lead the Shanti Mantra. Nagi, you have to unmute.
Oh, sorry. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah. Sarve santu niramaya. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you all.